Welcome to the Treasury Update Podcast, presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in. On this episode of the podcast, host Craig Jeffery interviews Maria D'Alessandro, Executive Vice President and CFO at Hospitality Ventures Management, on the impact of the COVID-19 shutdown on the hospitality industry. They discuss the magnitude of impact on the hotel business with view to financials, employees, regulation changes, and more. Listen in to this insightful discussion to find out more.
Welcome to the Treasury Update Podcast. This is Craig Jeffery from Strategic Treasurer. Today's host on this podcast, we're calling it Tales from the Front. We'll be looking at the hospitality industry in light of the COVID-19 shutdown. And I'm here with Maria D'Alessandro. Welcome to the podcast, Maria.
Thank you, Craig.
As we look at this concept in light of what's going on with the shutdown and the virus impacts, maybe it'd be useful if you gave a little bit of background on your current role and then some of the responsibilities you've had in the past, some of the different roles you've had.
Sure. Well, currently I'm Executive Vice President and CFO of Hospitality Ventures Management, LLC, otherwise known as HVMG. We are an owner and operator of hotels across the country. What that means is most people don't realize is when you stay in a hotel, it's probable that it is a franchise and not owned by the brand. It's actually owned by either private equity or a REIT or even just mom and pops. And so our role is to basically run the hotels. These are investors who really know nothing about the hotel, the operations of a hotel, but do like the returns that the hotel can offer, both from a cash flow perspective as well as an ROI or IRR.
During normal times, right?
Yes.
Maria and I worked together a number of years ago at a bank and a consulting firm. But yeah, you started back in accounting, didn't you?
I did. I was fortunate enough to, when I graduated college, work for Ernst & Young in audit. And I did that for a number of years. My biggest client was Pan Am. From there, I was able to move down to Atlanta and work for Delta Airlines for 8 years in a number of different departments. So I have a very varied background. Started in financial planning and analysis and moved over to Treasury, specifically cash management, and responsible for revenue accounting. So really had a great experience learning at Delta, but then decided I wanted to understand how different industries operate and moved on to consulting, which I did for 10 years and had some great clients like Coca-Cola, had some hospitals, Burger King, really all over the map, and then landed at HVMG was my client and fell in love with the hospitality industry. I love that our purpose statement is be excellent in all we do so that our associates, our guests, and our partners love us. And that really fits my personality and having meaning in my position, not just running numbers and telling people either good news or bad news financially, but really supporting our owners and our hotels and our guests with excellent service.
Yeah, so that's a great background and touching a bunch of industries, several of which were impacted very heavily, and it'll be interesting to see as we talk through this what knowledge and insight can be gained, even if someone's working in a different industry, because a lot of these principles can be applied elsewhere. But maybe we can talk about how COVID-19 has been impacting your business. You may want to go through a timeline or sequence or just talk about key events, but just help us understand the impact to you guys.
It's interesting because earlier in this week we had a leadership meeting, which we typically do monthly towards the end of the month, and it's the executive vice presidents and vice presidents, and it's a 6 to 8 hour event where we really talk about what's going on in everybody's world and analyzing how our hotels are performing. And so earlier in this week, we were going over the minutes from our February meeting. We didn't have a March meeting for obvious reasons, but It was February 27th, and it wasn't even an agenda item. It was, we have 8, 10 agenda items. We switch it up every month. It wasn't even on the agenda, but it came up in the notes. I was the note taker for that meeting, and so reviewing the notes, we saw it was an afterthought of analyzing the effect that COVID-19 will have on our hotels. And our COO was to send direction to our hotels on what to forecast as an impact the virus was going to have. And I believe the next day or the day after, so again, February 28th, so he sent out an email and said, you need to forecast 30% drop in revenue. We think that'll be it. So a month later, less than 4 weeks later, we were laying off 80 to 90% of our associates at the hotel. And 2 months later, we've seen such a drastic reduction in our revenue. To put it in numerical form, hotels measure performance by occupancy, right? A very logical analysis. You have 100 rooms. How many rooms did you sell last night? Earlier in the week, our occupancy, the budgeted occupancy was 74%. Our actual occupancy was 9%. It's a pretty huge reduction. But it wasn't just our occupancy that took a hit, it's also the average daily rate, so what people are paying at our hotels. Our portfolio average on Monday was $105. Last year, it was $131. So obviously, big impact to the financials when both your average price and your occupancy are down. It's a double whammy.
You've talked a little bit about the magnitude of the impact and how quick it was in short order. Maybe we can talk about a couple elements: financial, staff, employee, and risk. What's been the reaction with creditors? Have this change environment? Does it trigger material adverse clause gets triggered? Are you staying in good contact with them? How has that been? How have you been able to work through that?
It's been an interesting month in that it's ever changing. It's not even every week, it's every day, it's more news. And when we started discussions with our largest creditors for our hotels, and we have 14 owners, including our own that we have investment in. And so we have 14 banks that we're dealing with from the loan perspective, and the loans range anywhere from 60 to 80% of the value of the hotel. So some are quite large, and we're negotiating with the lenders for some forbearance. And so when you're talking with banks, you have all different banks, some that are backed by insurance money, and you have some that are just a local regional bank, and a local or a regional bank, and they negotiate differently. We've had some that were right away, oh yes, you can defer your interest expense for the next 3 or 4 months, and we'll revisit it in 3 months and just roll that interest into principal at the end. And then we have had some that were basically like big no. A lot of it is let's wait and see, and then in the end, it's going to drive a lot of a lot of hotels into bankruptcy. We definitely see that in the near term, and in the medium term, you're going to see a lot of hotels being basically foreclosed upon by the banks. So that's been our biggest focus, in addition to, trying to get the PPP loans. So that's another item that the banks are interested in, because the PPP loans do allow for interest to be a forgivable expense. The majority of it has to be payroll, but a good chunk of it can be utilities and interest, which like most companies, those are the 3 biggest expenses from a hotel perspective, including franchise. So we've been working with our the utilities and our franchise and our local vendors for not necessarily we're negotiating reductions if possible, or deferrals of expenses. But regarding our staff, as I mentioned earlier, we had to furlough or lay off a good majority of it. So our hotels are down to bare bones. So if you have 100 keys, which is the term in the industry, or 100 rooms, you have 8 guests in the room in the hotel, you don't really need a large staff. So our general managers, our directors of sales, our controllers are actually playing the part of housekeeper. They're playing the part of front desk agent. They're playing the part of engineer and so forth. So really, our associates have really stepped up in this time and are working 50, 60 hours a week to make sure that the rooms are cleaned, basically double cleaned and triple cleaned. We've initiated where a guest will not stay in a room that another guest had stayed in within 48 hours. So that way we can do double cleaning in our guest room. So, we're taking the steps to protect our guests and as well as our associates. From a risk standpoint, we've ordered masks for our hotels and gloves, so we have a stockpile in our hotels to make sure. We have lines at our front desk so that the guests know the 6 feet mark, and so and then we're working with the brands and ensuring that we're following brand standards in keeping the hotels as spotless as possible.
Maria, as you have gone through this new changed cleaning process and people taking on different roles and obviously a significant number of layoffs or furloughs, how are you keeping your team up to date? How are you managing the team since there is so much turmoil and obviously there's some tough news to deliver, and then there might be some other things that are a bright side as things open up?
Yes, communication is key all the time, but especially in terms of when you're asking your associates to go above and beyond, you have to show gratitude. We laugh about the fact that the corporate office, we call us blue or analytical or numerical. That is, just happens to be where we favor the numerical side of things, so we're having to pull out our red or our people side, which isn't difficult to do when we're seeing the struggles that our hotels are going through. So we're focusing on communication. So at the corporate level, we're doing daily meetings with the leadership team, and each of the departments we have daily meetings as well. Accounting and HR and ops are doing their own meetings, revenue, and so forth. So we feel like, and it's not hour-long conversations, it's 10 to 15, and you have to be very aware of not only what people are saying, but how they're saying it, because they could be contradictory, right? Yeah, I'm great, everything's fine, but you have to listen to that tone and see, really, is everything fine? Because everybody is under a lot of stress, both professionally and personally. It's communicate. So we are also trying to do webinars with our hotels every other week. We don't want to overkill it. There's not a lot to say, but you want to give people that visibility that you are there and you're listening and you understand the pain they're going through. And we're actually asking that it be a video conference. We had one yesterday and only half of our general managers actually did the video portion. But what we want is to encourage next time for everybody to be on video, because we want to see them, we want them to see us, and make sure we have that touch point. And to see again how their expressions and are they engaged? And this isn't just an HR tact. It's all of us. We need to be fully aware of how everybody is doing during these very trying times.
Yeah, I think I like how you've emphasized communication and how you're adapting that to the new environment, including work-life balance and how some of those elements have changed. You touched upon this 48 hours between someone using the same room and double cleaning. Are there any new regulations you have to follow, or just recommendations, new cleaning protocols, anything with regard to that, or managing properties when you don't have, you're under 30% or under 20% occupied?
Well, we are every town, county, city, state, right? They are issuing their own guidance, and we certainly are following the guidance. We start locally. So if there is a shelter in place, then for sure, we are encouraging our associates to, follow that as well, because we don't want them to be impacted by the virus, both personally and professionally. We actually have a lot of our general managers who are staying at our hotels for a number of reasons, just to be there to support the associates who are working, but also to isolate themselves so they do not become a carrier, of the virus. So that's important, is to make sure we're keeping up with the standards as established, by the local governments or states. And in addition, we have the brands, Marriott, Hilton, Hyatt, IHG. Like we definitely have to stay in tuned, and the brands have done an excellent job in establishing protocols to ensure the safety of our guests, and immediately we will implement those as recommended by the brands. And sometimes, we will take what one brand is. One brand might be slower than the other brand, but if we have a best-in-class recommendation by one brand, we will communicate it to all of our hotels to make sure that we are keeping up with the latest and greatest recommendations to ensure the safety of our associates and our guests.
Yeah, let's shift a little bit in terms of moving to the topic of information gathering. When things are developing quickly, sometimes information isn't the best. What did you do to focus on gaining the right type of information for how to respond and plan? And I know you gave that example in the beginning. It was, the impact of COVID was a bit of an afterthought, and then a month later it's, fully impacting your industry. But who did you call first? What did you find were some of the best sources of good information as you've been navigating through this?
Really, we've had three sources. The first that we called our typical is our attorneys, and they helped guide us through navigate the employment rules, because what we needed to protect the asset and our investments and our investors. And so we knew right away that we needed to lay off, a large majority of our associates, and we wanted to do it in a way that protected our investors as well as the associates. So with employment law, different in all states, and we are in 14 states, we wanted to make sure we were not doing anything that was inappropriate. So we leveraged our attorneys who were expert in employment law. We also, on the professional side, we also were gaining guidance from our tax advisors, because as we know, there have been many initiatives by our government, and we wanted to make sure that we were taking advantage from a tax perspective of any and all initiatives that are being pushed out on a regular basis. Of course, we all know that there's something stated, and then it'll take 6 months to actually get guidance on it. But we are constantly in contact with not just our tax advisors, but all of our investors' tax advisors. And on the professional side, we also are making sure that we are in tune with the experts on the hotel side. So there are a lot of different areas of expertise on the hotel side, and that could be on the, like I said, like the owner side, and then they're on the brand side, and then there's the not-for-profit AHLA, which is the entity that is working with the government to make sure that the hotels are included in any relief packages that are implemented by the government. So those are some of our go-tos. And then the second source of information is collaboration within the industry. So making sure Robert is our CEO, and there are plenty of boards and panels that are pulled together so that management company CEOs talk about best practices and how do we share information on what we're seeing from the future as well as what we're implementing to protect our guests and our associates as we talked. So, and then there was revenue. There's a revenue committee, and so how are hotels leveraging some of the potential guests without endangering the asset. And so people have heard about potentially hospitals commandeering or hiring or taking over hotels, and what are the if this is done, what do you have to do and how do you do it? And so on the revenue side, there are we're even though some of these management companies, or all of them, are competitors, we see a lot of the different management companies come together to work together because we all know that our industry is it really is at stake. It's it could implode like many industries. It's right on the cusp of going down a very dark hole. So that's the second. Peer group is a source of information. And then third, we have a PEO, which is a professional employment organization. So we've outsourced the administrative side of employment, and they have been a great partner, and taking care of the minutia while we can focus more on the strategic side of HR. So, as well as the PEO is, at the heart of what is and isn't allowed, assisting us in implementing a lot of our strategies. So that's those have been our sources.
As we talk about, as we move to, what do you think when you look ahead towards restarting? What will that look like? Are there any positive news elements that you've seen in the last month or so as occupancy rates decline? You're trying to navigate a number of these challenging situations.
Yeah, we've been fortunate, and then as a management company, a third-party management company, we do have contracts with owners to manage the hotels. As I mentioned before, we recently were hired to take on management of we call it a 4-pack. So it would be 4 hotels by this individual owner who was not happy with their current manager. And so we do take this, as an opportunity to, really sell ourselves, because, we do realize that there is activity going on, not nearly as significant as earlier in the year or last year, but there still is opportunities for some of these hotels that are going into receivership. We're out there trying to, see if we can take over management for the banks, like act on behalf of the banks, because even though the banks own these assets, they need somebody to manage it because they're definitely not experts. So from a business development side, we're quite busy in trying to look to the future and continue to build on our strategy of growth. And so there's always, unfortunately, other people's loss will hopefully be our gain, but it certainly is a great story to tell our associates who are out there struggling, like, hey, we know it's tough right now, but we're getting more management contracts, so it's a positive for the company as a whole.
And it'll position you well as things move forward. For restarting, when as this clears and the economy opens up in phases, hopefully thoughtfully and in a calibrated way, what will that look like? Will employees come back? I mean, there's obviously schools aren't being opened up probably till fall. Summer camps seem to be closed. Daycare is oftentimes closed. How is restarting going to look? What are you thinking about in that way?
Well, it's fortunately all of our owners have resisted the easy answer of just shutting down the hotels. And it's not been insignificant, the number of hotels that actually have shut down. But we have run the numbers and we provide it to our investors and show them just keep it running, because we don't know when that rebound will happen. And so we want to be poised and ready for it. We have had over 50% of our cancellations from the spring, so groups or conferences that were in the spring, over 50% have booked for the fall. So that's a great, it's like, oh, it's only half. No, that's great that 50% still believe that there is an end in sight and want to, go on with normalcy, right? And so by maintaining this baseline of associates at our hotels, we are ready. And we actually have a playbook that we've created already for our hotels to execute a ramp up plan. Critical path items and, if this, then that scenarios. So very robust plans that can be implemented at the hotel level and with the corporate as support for this backup. So we believe we are very poised for this, but we are not going to make the first move. We were talking recently about the food and beverage side of hotels, which were the first to really feel the impact, right? Restaurants closed down rather quickly in almost all of our hotels. But we don't want to be a leader. A lot of times, we understand we do want to be in forefront, but it's too risky. And so we believe the hotels will come back first from just what we call transient. By the way, it's a great time to be booking vacations because you can get some really great rates, as I discussed earlier, especially at some of those appealing resort-style hotels are offering some great rates to get what we call heads in beds. We don't want to be the leader in opening up too soon and just be ready for the transient and then build up to where our F&B, we have to have a certain occupancy level. And then when we believe we're reaching that, then we will return to the F&B side. Of course, some of our brands require us to have a breakfast available to our guests, but they've been very accommodating in allowing us to keep it shut down until such time that it makes financial sense to open the restaurants as well. But let me make it very clear, the industry as a whole will take a very long time to rebound. Right now, it is estimated that it will take to late 2021 and probably 2022 to when we return to the 2019 levels of occupancy and rate. So this isn't going to happen overnight. It's going to be short to medium term before we get back to where we were.
Yeah, interesting. Hopefully it's faster than that. Some of the information from our weekly survey in the Global Crisis Monitor, we see that the estimation for most organizations are looking out, seeing it has extended to about 9 months to some maybe 10 months, depending on what's going on. But obviously industries are different and they weren't impacted as much. But that brings us, as we draw to a close, I really wanted to get your advice on what would you tell people in other industries where the impact isn't as immediate. They didn't experience a 75 or 60, 70, 80% drop in their business right away. What items would you want to share that would be useful knowledge and insight?
Yes, Craig, it's very interesting because when I did work with you in consulting and working capital was my specialty, I would give many presentations and advise those in the audience as well as my clients to really work the working capital, meaning aggressively collect your receivables and slow your AP and basically use your vendors as your interest-free banks. But I've been with HVMG for 9.5 years, and as I mentioned before, with the hospitality industry, you want to be a good partner, and we've always been paying when invoices were due. And really, as a result, this has been how many years in the making that we feel that our suppliers have been very flexible in working with us to help either extend terms and help us manage our liquidity or even reduce the fees by half or however we've negotiated with a significant number of our vendors to assist us during this time period, and for the most part they have been great partners. And I do believe that is because we have a history with them, in supporting them. And we definitely are erring on the side of the smaller. We believe in supporting our local small business owners because their liquidity depends on us. So we will choose the local dry cleaner who is cleaning our hotel guests' laundry, and if we have to make a choice between them and a large telecommunication provider, we will pay the mom and pop because we want them to be in business, and we know that their issue is their cash availability may be a little bit more drastic than some of the larger corporations. Everybody will eventually get paid, it's just a matter of when. It's amazing how people have come together, and you hear stories about it all the time, but we have 1,500 associates who've been laid off and are struggling because we've heard that the states are having a difficult time with the unemployment claims. Last week we heard some stories about these people not being able to buy groceries for their family, and we decided we would do a GoFundMe, and our goal was to raise $25,000, and we did that in 3 days, which is just amazing. And it wasn't just associates who were still employed that actually donated. It was also others who had been terminated and were fortunate enough to be collecting their unemployment and or just had the funds available to them. So it is amazing how, while there is a lot of unfortunate things happening right now, it's people are good and people are working together to get us all through this.
That's a great way to end it. Appreciate that encouragement there, Maria. Thanks again for your time.
Great. Thanks, Craig. I appreciate it.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update Podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.